All right. We're going to do a chapter 1 overview of Ruth. That'll be our last video, I'm assuming, over Ruth. Chapter 1, I mean. And then next video, we will do a chapter 2 preview, which is pretty much go read chapter 2, go over chapter 2, and then the next video after that, we'll start verse by verse. So we're going to spend the next, 45 minutes to an hour going over chapter 1 of Ruth. So we'll take our time. It may go longer, I don't know. But hey, man, taking care of business every day. I wish I had a truck. Um, it's winter time. So, hallelujah. All right, Ruth. Um, I'm gonna read chapter 1, just straight through, no commentary. Then we're gonna read chapter 1 through with commentary, and I'll watch the time. Hopefully, we don't go to like 3 hours or something. But this is the last video I plan on doing on chapter 1. It's time to move on. If I don't have any books complete, any playlists complete as far as books of the Bible, then I'm definitely a tweaking method. Can't doing a lot, but not getting anything done, not complete anything. All right. Book of friend. I mean Ruth. That's what it means. Friend, companion. Subject: a complete prefigure of the Gentile sinner being brought with Israel, God's elect, into the divine inheritance through the redemption of Christ in their union with Him. Divine inheritance. What's this divine inheritance? Well, I mean, number one, it was this matter of the inheritance of her husband, yes, and the inheritance of her father, right? The only family died. There's no inheritance to be raised up upon a dead man's name. And this inheritance is traced back to what? Bethlehem of Judah. And Bethlehem of Judah is traced back to what? God's allotment of the good land. So this is a divine inheritance, something that God allotted to the children of Israel. But this divine inheritance, into the divine inheritance through the redemption of Christ in their union with Him. Now, into the divine inheritance, which is through the redemption of Christ. Now, that's the redemption of their kinsman Boaz, who's a type of Christ, right? In their union with Him. Why was Boaz able to redeem uh, Elimelech's inheritance? See, Elimelech, he lost his inheritance, right? Needed to be redeemed. Right? His needed to be redeemed because he died. Well, who was going to redeem him was his sons, but they died, right? And thus there was a need for a kinsman back in Bethlehem and Judah to redeem their inheritance. So looking at the subject again, a complete prefigure of the Gentile sinners, right? You can even think of that as Ruth, of course, being brought with Israel. Think of that in the sense of Naomi as far as the law that says this matter of the gleanings for the orphan, stranger, sojourner, widow, right? So that's how they are brought with Israel. That law specifically, right, was for her, and the fact that 10 generations is up. Moabites can go into their land. Notice when her husband dies, she is known as Ruth the Moabitess. She's not known as Ruth, Ruth of the tribe of Judah, right? because which when she was married, Ruth the Bethlehemite, the Ephrathite, right? She would have been known as what? Ruth the Ephrathite. Why? Because her husband was an Ephrathite, right? But he wasn't. He was from. He was He was Ephrathites from Bethlehem of Judah, and Ephrathite means a fruitful place, perhaps representing the Garden of Eden. Of they're Ephrathites, a fruitful place, yet their name is what? Weak and infirmity and sick, and failing and wasting away. So Ruth, with the death of her husband, it still holds the title Moabite now, Ruth the Moabitess, because her husband died, right? Well, in a sense, she's a Moabitess just by birth, but with the death of her husband, she's back to I'm a Moabite in nature, and always will be in a sense, unless I can get the redemption of my body because I still have the flesh. So, who's pursuing who is really the question here in this story. Ruth still has the flesh, yet she um, is not the initiator, number one. Boaz is the initiator. Boaz is the initiator in the sense that a report went out that Jehovah visited his people with food. Okay? And it's the word that initiates, right? God actually initiates. God initiates. Actually, that's the real initiator. I'm sorry, I wasn't Boaz. Although we see initiation from Boaz, it's not the initiator, because it's an ordained, because marriage is ordained by God. God initiates. How does he initiate? Jehovah visited. Jehovah visited. Jehovah visited what? His people with food. Then the report went out, right? The gospel went out all the way to the land of Moab. And in the land of Moab, somebody told Naomi that Jehovah visited his people with food. Now, it doesn't say that Naomi um, heard from somebody in the country of Moab, which I just told you. It says she heard in the country of Moab. So, guess what? What did she hear in the country of Moab? That Jehovah visited his people with food, right? She heard that in the country of Moab. In a sense, she heard in the Moab, so we say Jehovah visited his people with food. Now, it doesn't say anything about Bethlehem of Judah, right? Or Judah, in the land of Judah, till verse 7, right? But in verse 6, it says she rose up with her daughters in order to return from the country of Moab, not to return to the land of Judah, but from the country of Moab, because she heard in the country of Moab that Jehovah visited his people with food. So Joab initiated, but actually he visited his people with food, and Naomi and Ruth are his people. Number one, Ruth's the future his people, right? Naomi is not actually his people. She's his people through marriage, but she's from Bethlehem of Judah. So who are his people? Kinsmen, future kinsmen. But through these future kinsmen, they could be his people, and thus be a part of seeing Jehovah's food, right? So Ruth exercises her right, through the law. What I'm trying to say is Jehovah visited his people all the way to the country of Moab, his people. Just like if Ruth is truly Boaz's wife, becomes Boaz's wife, then she is his wife, even in the eyes of God, because it's ordained. So it's going to happen no matter what. So in a sense, Ruth is, right, his people, one of his people, right? Now, Naomi is too old to have a husband. But she can see that if Ruth can get a kinsman, that kinsman, somebody close to her from Elimelech's family, could redeem her inheritance. And to redeem Ruth's inheritance is to redeem her husband's inheritance. Why? Because the husband's inheritance is actually the one, Elimelech's inheritance is actually the one at stake, right? Ruth could have inherited, right, Elimelech's inheritance if her husband was still alive, because she would be married to her husband and he would inherit her father's his father's inheritance. Okay, but Elimelech dies, and and her husband dies, right? So she needs to go get a kinsman. Now, um, we'll see Naomi mentions that she's too old to have a husband. So, let's see here. Okay, hold on a second. I almost got this. Along with your daughters, they went on the way to Judah. Okay, let me think here. So Naomi, okay, okay, let me just read chapter 1, and then I want to go again because I have something here I want to say concerning her being too old to have a husband, right? And with the fact of, in verse 8, this is the one that kicks me, and that's the one that, okay, it says, "May Jehovah deal kindly with you, just as you have dealt with the dead and with me." Now that is kindly. So it's a matter of kindness. Mentioned again in chapter 3, right? Where Boaz says, "This kindness is greater, the latter kindness is greater than that you've shown your mother in law," right? Is that what it says? He says, "Must be you of Jehovah, my daughter. You have shown your latter kindness to be better than your first by not going after choice young men, whether poor or rich." So it's her chastity is her latter kindness, right? Her singleness for Boaz is her latter kindness. What's her first kindness? What's the former kindness? It's how she has dealt with the dead and with her mother-in-law, Naomi. May Jehovah deal kindly with you, right? So it's going to be recompensed on how she deals with Naomi, just as you have dealt with the dead and with me. So that kindness is proportional to how she's going to deal with the dead and me. So how's she going to deal with the dead? Who's the dead? Her father-in-law, her husband, and her husband, and her husband's brother. If let's say she's married to Malon, right? Malon dies. Well, Chilion now has to produce seed through her to raise up an inheritance for her, to raise up a dead man's name, his brother, upon his inheritance, right? His inheritance would be carried through his name, not the name of his brother, but through his name. So he would do a kinsman duty to redeem her inheritance and her, right? To raise up seed. It's in the law. And that would probably be also with the death of. I don't know if you can actually be married and then raise up seed through your brother's inheritance if you're married. Interesting. I don't think you can. That wouldn't be married. That'd be adultery. Yeah. I don't know. Concubine. No, you wouldn't do that. It wouldn't be. That wouldn't be. That wouldn't be law. There was no way. That wouldn't be righteous. But both are dead. Okay, so you don't have a redeemer. And not only that, the closest redeemer that they would have doesn't do it because there's one closer to Boaz. Boaz does it, right? So this closest redeemer, let's say Orpah came along with them, right? Well, only one can marry Boaz. Who's going to be that one? It's the one that's chaste towards him. Well, she doesn't end up becoming really chaste towards him. It's not expressed until she's in his field. So not only that, what she doesn't realize is till she's in his field does she actually have the active chaste. But you see her chastity just with Naomi, and the fact that she clings to Naomi, right? Her will is set with Naomi, and her heart is set for a kinsman, and the fact that Naomi what exposes the emotion. Would you refrain from having a husband, right? Even if I had sons tonight, had a husband and sons tonight, would you wait for them to grow up and refrain from having a husband? No, right? So she's talking about the ability to produce sons to be their husbands, right? Um, in order to raise up, that would not raise up a dead man's name because those aren't kinsmen. Now, if she had a husband, it would have no relationship to them because they're not all, none of them are blood related to each other. It would have no relationship to them as far as redeeming their dead husband's inheritance, dead man's inheritance. So may Jehovah deal kindly with you, just as you have dealt with the dead and with me. Just coming back here for a second. Okay. So, how have they dealt with the dead? Well, Orpah, number one, realized her inheritance is not going to be. I mean, they both realized the inheritance that they lost will not be redeemed if it's a matter of Naomi's kids, Naomi's sons, right? Naomi's husband. That would be the husband's inheritance, right? The new husband's inheritance, right? Not Elimelech's inheritance. Okay? And Orpah goes back to her gods, which are her husbands. I mean, her husband's dead, but it's really a matter of her gods. Well, this matter of return my daughters go, for I'm too old to have a husband, even if I said a hope and I had a husband and I bore sons. Would you wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from having a husband? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than it should be for you, for the hand of Jehovah has gone forth against me. So, the first kindness is right here at the split. And this is what Bo is saying with latter kindness. Okay, this is the former kindness. This is a matter of the kindness to obtain the first garment. I know it's not applied until the beginning of chapter 3, but this is the kindness of what? The kindness of Ruth to wanting to get a kinsman to raise up her dead husband's inheritance. And thus, her dead husband's inheritance, right, as the son of Elimelech, right, would be Elimelech's inheritance that he gave to his son. But it'd be all Elimelech's inheritance. You go, no, with the Mahlon and Chilion. Well, both are dead, so now the inheritance is now one. Okay? So there's inheritance that's now one. The inheritance of Elimelech, which now can be brought to a kinsman redeemer. How many kinsman redeemers? One. The father's dead, the brothers are dead, right? So now we would go to a kinsman redeemer. Well, that kinsman redeemer can only marry Orpah or Ruth. You see what I'm saying? Well, the closest kinsman redeemer we see at the end, right, is the natural man. And he doesn't redeem Ruth's inheritance, not because he doesn't have the ability to redeem it. He doesn't want to mar his own inheritance, right? First he says he's going to do it. Then Boaz says, you also have to acquire Ruth the Moabitess, right? said, no, it's going to mar my inheritance. Number one, she's a Moabitess. And she's allowed to come in, but it would mar his inheritance because she's not chaste towards him, right? It's a matter of the chastity. That's the one the kinsman's going to redeem. Well, Orpah doesn't even go to Bethlehem of Judah. Orpah splits and finds rest in her dead husband's house, right? Initiated by Naomi saying what? May Jehovah grant you to find rest, each of you, in the house of your husband, right? So she goes to her dead husband's house, right? Well, not necessarily dead husband, it says she goes back to her gods. Grant rest in your husband's house. Well, Ruth, ordained by God, is what? Boaz's husband, right? Who visited Ruth with food. How? Through the word. Man shall not live by bread alone, but every word spoken by Naomi, right? Based upon what she heard, not in the land of Judah, but in Moab. So he visited Ruth all the way to Moab, right? By visiting his people with food in Bethlehem of Judah, the word report went out and reached Naomi all the way in the country of Moab, and she heard, not from somebody, but in the country of Moab, right? So she was the person actually speaking. It's interesting. That Jehovah visited his people with food, she tells Ruth. Or does she? She hears it, right? And from that point on, she rises up. And she rises up with Ruth and Orpah. And Orpah and Ruth both hear this. And then there's an exposing halfway, right? And an 8, which is a matter of how are you going to deal with the dead and how are you going to deal with me? You got to this point because you heard that Jehovah had visited his people with food, right? This is the halfway point. But now the exposing is going to be not being motivated by food, but are you motivated by a kinsman redeemer? Because I need my inheritance redeemed through my sons because my husband died, right? And I'm too old to have a husband. So as far as having a kinsman redeemer, it's out of the question. She's too old, you know. And the kinsmans are probably not into old hags. They want the young, ripe fruit. I'm just kidding. They want the young chicks and girls. And so she's too old. She has no hope to get a kinsman redeemer for her dead husband to raise up his inheritance. His inheritance thus goes to his sons, who are now dead. But her sons now have wives, right? Who can get a kinsman redeemer to redeem. Now, if she brought both there, the inheritance of her husband would have been split in two. She would need two kinsman redeemers, and her inheritance would not be redeemed. It would be split. Her inheritance would be redeemed, but half of it would be Orpah's and half of it would be Ruth's, right? She cares about her husband's inheritance being raised up, right? But with Orpah leaving, and the reason she speaks these things is to divide the thoughts and intentions of the heart, as we see, right? To expose, to separate, is so that whatever kinsman redeems of Ruth's husband, right, is actually going to be Elimelech's inheritance. Because Orpah leaves, so there's only need for one kinsman redeemer, right? Which is good news for Naomi because what he will redeem will be actually all of Elimelech's possessions. You see what I'm saying? So really, there can only be one kinsman redeemer. Two would be the inheritance would be half. You see? Does that make sense? And now, would Naomi get to participate in what Ruth's inheritance is redeemed? She participate in that inheritance? Well, not by life, because she's actually not a descendant of Naomi, right? But by legality, um, or maybe by friendship. That's what it is. That's why Ruth is friend. Because if Ruth is clinging to her and is her friend, then she knows that whatever is redeemed, whatever her of her husband's is redeemed, and her being redeemed, and her being a friend of Naomi would be as if Naomi gets to participate in her husband's inheritance, yet without a husband. I understand that, but she could have it through her friendship with Ruth, and she sees that because Boaz is from Elimelech's family. So it's a matter of raising up a dead man's name upon his inheritance. So what Boaz would redeem is the inheritance, is Ruth, right? But he would not have his name upon the inheritance he redeems. The inheritance he redeems would be the name of the dead man, which is either Mahlon or Chilion. But if Mahlon or Chilion, then the inheritance would have been stayed with Elimelech. So it's a matter of carrying on Elimelech's name even. And Elimelech's name, wow. So let's say Mahlon and Chilion died, Elimelech lived, Ruth's widowed. What would be needed? No brothers. I got to get a kinsman. Well, would you need to get a kinsman? No, because then the inheritance would go back to the father Elimelech. See what I'm saying? This is a situation ordained by God, sovereignly arranged by God as far as the deaths, but ordained by God because of the marriage in eternity past planned by him with Ruth and Boaz. Wait a minute. All marriages are ordained by God. Well, yes, that's true. But what was the original perfect will of God is for Boaz and Ruth to be married. And for that to happen, the first thing that was initiated was Jehovah, who visited his people with food. Now, wait a minute. What about Ruth's husband? Well, actually, Ruth's husband married Ruth 10 years ago. And thus, at that time, Ruth was what? Not allowed to go within the congregation of Israel. It was not the fullness of the times yet, at least for the 10 years. Now, I know it's a matter of 10 generations, and Ruth actually is the 10th generation, right? Of Moabites, right? But in the picture here, it wasn't even time, right? So, in other words, he married somebody who could not, who was not allowed to be brought into the congregation of Jehovah. So, it was not a marriage that was recognized by God. It's not his perfect will. But because his perfect will was what? Boaz and Ruth, husband dies, and her father in law dies. Right? How? Because of the famine. No food. Right? So, in the fullness of the time, 10 years in the country of Moab, he visited his people with food, right? When? After the death of the husband. After the death of all the husbands. Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion. So it had to be at the death of all the husbands, right? She was left with her. She was left with. Okay, well, wait a minute. And she was left without. Now, Mahlon and Chilion died after 10 years. Before the 10 years, Elimelech died. Okay, so. Okay, and so then they dwelt there 10 years. Then Mahlon and Chilion died. So the beginning of the 10 years, Elimelech dies. The end of the 10 years, Mahlon and Chilion die. Okay. Now, interesting how. Okay, so with all the death of the males and no offspring, she's not only an orphan, widow, stranger, sojourner, but the sovereignty that her husbands would die gave her the opportunity to cause Naomi to return to the land of Judah, because Jehovah visited his people with food, but visited her with the gospel, which is, every word, right? Proceeded not Jehovah. To go with Naomi back to the land of Judah, because Jehovah visited his people with food. Naomi's the head of the household, right? Then there's a split, because Naomi realizes with two of her daughters going, she needs to know who's her friend, who is going to show kindness to her, right? Going to show kindness to her by being with her, even if she doesn't have a husband or kids. She doesn't have her husband or kids, or again, what's Ruth thinking? I'm getting a kinsman. What's Orpah thinking? She's not thinking about kinsman, redeemer. She's not even thinking about her inheritance, right? She's thinking about her gods, right? So she kissed her mother-in-law, Ruth clung. Okay, and Ruth clung because, well, really, the is her chastity to Boaz. Without seeing Boaz, but the fact that there's a kinsman. But what's joining them? What reached her was the word that Jehovah visited his people with food. So there's a famine. This forces her to be chaste for Boaz through his land, through the gleanings, because there is no other food. There's only one place there's food, Bethlehem of Judah, right? And at Bethlehem of Judah, she's not only there for food because there's no other place, but she's there for finding favor, finding grace in the sight of whatever field, the sight of one who owns the field that whatever she wants she goes to. So she's trusting in the sovereignty of God, the ordination of God, to bring her to the one prepared for her. Okay? So this is Ruth's choosing. Then you have the matter of the actual courting initiated by Boaz, by saying, who is this girl? And it's initiated by him after hearing of her kindness towards her mother-in-law, right? By being brought here with her mother-in-law, by clinging to her, by being her friend, right? And by hopefully getting a kinsman redeemer for her dead husband to raise up an inheritance for her dead father-in-law. This is how she's dealing with the dead, right? And with Naomi. She's also dealing with the dead with Orpah's husband, who's dead, because he is participating in the same inheritance. It's all about raising a dead man's name, Naomi's husband and two kids, upon their inheritance by their inheritance being redeemed by Ruth's kinsman, and Ruth being redeemed right? To redeem the inheritance for what? The name of Elimelech, not the name of Boaz, right? Not even the name of Ruth, right? But for the name of Naomi's husband, Elimelech. And okay, so Elimelech dies, so the inheritance does go to Mahlon and Chilion. But the fact that they both, okay, so that's why Elimelech died first. So the whole inheritance is now split between Mahlon and Chilion. They now have inherited that. And Naomi's a widow, right? And Naomi being a widow, right, shows that she has a right to any of the gleanings of any of the fields of Bethlehem of Judah. Yet she's too old to have a husband. Well, with her right to go and glean in any other field, I'm sorry, I'm just following this train of thought. For her to go and glean in her field. So she realizes if Jehovah visited his people with food, she's seeing about just getting food. She recognizes she's a widow. And as a widow, she's a widow who is too old to have a husband. Ruth is a widow who is not too old to have a husband, and thus she's a younger widow, which Paul says, I encourage younger widows to marry. And if she can get Ruth to marry the kinsman, he can redeem her inheritance. What's her inheritance? It's the inheritance actually of both husbands because both have died, right? Whether it was Mahlon first, Chilion first, it wouldn't matter, would it? And Orpah um, left because of Naomi's exposure, because Naomi really only wanted one. Naomi only had one and exposed Ruth to be what? Her friend, named Ruth, which clings to her, right? And who is set with her will to go and even to die and be buried with her, right? You realized whatever kinsman she runs into, that kinsman will redeem her inheritance. And because of Ruth's heart for Boaz, or heart for food and for perhaps a kinsman, because that's what she was intending to do when she was gleaning, right? She clings to Naomi, and her will is set and choosing based upon wherever Naomi goes. So Naomi knows that when her inheritance is redeemed by her kinsman redeemer, she'll be able to participate in that because she's her friend. You see what I'm saying? So Ruth's her only hope, not by blood, but because Ruth is her friend. Ruth is clung to her. Ruth is set with her will. And Naomi, after she sees her will set, ceases to speak to her about it. Okay? Knowing that this one can redeem my inheritance, right? In order to raise a dead man's name upon his inheritance, can redeem her inheritance, which will actually be the inheritance of both Mahlon and Chilion, because Orpah didn't come to go get a kinsman, which is the totality of Elimelech's inheritance. And Naomi can enjoy that inheritance, although it won't be her inheritance in the fact that she had no sons to inherit. Actually, you know what? Would a kinsman then thus raise up an inheritance for a woman's dead sons who were supposed to receive the inheritance? No, it would be the brother. So she would have all the participation in the inheritance because Ruth inherited it, because she is a friend of Ruth. She wanted to see where Ruth's heart was with her, so that if Ruth got a kinsman to redeem not only her husband's inheritance, but her husband's brother's inheritance, because he's dead too, and Orpah has left, right, through Naomi's exposing, it would equal Elimelech's inheritance. And Naomi would participate in that inheritance, not because she's married to Elimelech. Elimelech's dead. It has nothing to do with marriage. It has nothing to do with life. It has everything to do with friendship, with clinging, right? With the kindness that she shows towards Naomi, right? Because she needs Naomi as what? The one who's going to get to Bethlehem of Judah, right? She also needs Naomi as what? To confirm the kinsmen that own the land that Ruth is in gleaning. Does that make sense? Right? So the only way so it's like, go, my daughters, go find a husband, back to the house of your husband, right? I don't have any kids for you to marry. And if I had a husband, and I'm too old to have a husband. If I did have a husband, right, and they did have kids, would you wait for them to grow? So in other words, the only way Naomi, she's speaking to them to expose their heart for her, right, and expose their will, their thoughts and intentions of the heart. Why? Because she said, well, the only way I'm going to have an inheritance with you guys is if your husband is actually from my loins, right? And if it's from my loins, that means I would have to have a husband in order for this to be legally mine based upon your marriage to my sons. And the way I have sons is I got to have a husband. If I did have a husband, I did have hope to have an inheritance and participate in that. Even if I had sons, which would be the only way I could even have a relationship or have a legal right to your inheritance. Would you wait till they grown? No, you wouldn't. Right? Would you refrain of having a husband? No, you're a young widow. You wouldn't. Right? Exposing the thoughts, exposing the emotions, the hearts. Right? Go, my daughters. So, what do we have? Return my daughters. I'm old hat. Okay. Would you refrain from having a husband? No, my daughters. It has been far more bitter for me than it should be for you. Why bitter for me? Because my husband died, my sons died. I literally do not have a kinsman redeemer. Number one, the one closest to um, my husband Elimelech, um, he's not Boaz, but there's actually one closer. But the thing is that is way too young for me. I may be a cougar, but I know my limits. She must have been really old, too old to have a husband. And she tells Naomi and Orpah to go, right, return. Not only that she's too old to have a husband, let's say she had a husband and had kids. What is she saying here? Is she's okay, too old to have a husband. If even she had a husband and had kids, would they refrain from having another husband? No, there'd be no point. So she's looking for her participation in her inheritance for a legal reason, right? Yet Orpah and Ruth, in order for them to participate in the inheritance of Elimelech, right? They would need a husband from Naomi if they cared about Naomi having any kind of inheritance, right? Well, Orpah didn't care for Naomi to have any kind of inheritance because she was not willing to wait, and the thoughts, intentions, and heart were exposed, and she went to her gods. Okay, she went to her gods. Um, okay. Uh, Return to her people and to her gods. Return with your sister-in-law. Well, guess what? Yeah, why come with me? I have no husband for you. Well, she's also thinking the kinsman redeemer. Why didn't Naomi say, "Oh, but there is a kinsman redeemer in Bethlehem of Judah, right? You can go with me then, meet up with him, and he can redeem your husband's inheritance," right? Why would Naomi not say that? Because it has nothing to do with her inheritance. Her inheritance went to her son. Elimelech died before her son. So it's Elimelech's inheritance split between two sons. And as sons, right, they should take care of their mom who's a widow. Because it's her mom. They're related by blood, right? So she knows that. Yet, remember, Elimelech's inheritance is back in Bethlehem of Judah. Back in Bethlehem of Judah. And it's with her two kids, right? So she's still hanging around. They pick up Moabite women. She's still hanging around. Now there's 5 people in here, right? Naomi, Mahlon, and Chilion, who are the true head of the household, and who have the inheritance split among them, and Ruth and Orpah. And so Naomi's around because of the life relationship to her sons, right? Took care of mom. So she participates as a widow, not because of legal reasons, but because of life reasons. Yet now Mahlon and Chilion die, and it's just her, Orpah, and Ruth, right? And she's left without her 2 children and her husband. So she is straight up not left without an inheritance. Left without an inheritance. Well, maybe she can marry a kinsman. Well, she's too old to marry, to have a husband, right? Too old, meaning perhaps Amalek's brothers weren't around, but she's too old to have a husband. And she wasn't thinking having a husband by the kinsman redeemer, right? To redeem the inheritance of Elimelech, a name upon an Elimelech, right? She was thinking another husband with another inheritance, right? Oh, she's thinking, oh, the kinsman can redeem my inheritance. That'd be fine. She might be going back to Bethlehem, Judah. Who knows? And she might have gone cougar crazy or something like that, and she could have still married somebody in Bethlehem, Judah, even a kinsman, to redeem her inheritance, right? But then she says, even if I had a husband and had sons, right? Would you wait until they were grown to marry them? Because they'll receive the inheritance if I can get married to a kinsman. Even if I could marry a kinsman to redeem my inheritance. This inheritance will go to what? Sons. And then these sons would have to grow, marry women, right? Who would then have the inheritance of Elimelech included in the redemption of Naomi's new husband, which would be a future kinsman redeemer. So let's say everything went right, and that's actually what she did, but she didn't. I mean, not that she didn't. She used that as an exposing, as a dividing. She wanted to see who had a heart and a love for a kinsman redeemer, Bethlehem of Judah. Wow, interesting. So she knew one who would have a heart for a kinsman, which would be somebody who was able to redeem her dead man's inheritance in Bethlehem of Judah. But really, maybe not even that. I mean, and then she could be a friend to her, right? Who would be her friend? It'd be the one that will go with her all the way to Bethlehem of Judah. no matter what. Only if anything but death parts me from you. So there's two girls here, two hearts. I need to see what heart is set, is determined to go with me, whose will is set, right, to go with me. Where you die, I will die, right? Because if she is, then I could get her to go to a field, right? She asks in whose sight I pay favor. She says go. Sort of this separate. If anything but death separates me from you. Go. Okay. And she goes into the field. Boaz recognizes her. And Boaz recognizes her, then asks one of his reapers about her. So he initiates there as far as the scene, right? Which was initiated, so that's the initiation. You see the male aspect doing the initiation, and you do see them, which is a picture of God initiating, not man. Man's the female, God, the wife. God's the husband, and he initiated by visiting his people with food, sending the word out all the way to the land of Moab, where Naomi hears it, and what? Naomi hears it, responds, and returns. And Ruth and Orpah both go with her because number one, there's a famine. Number two, okay, so number one, there's a famine. Now, that will get them as far as the halfway point, right? Because it'd be more than just food, you know. It has to be this matter of a husband, love, right? So, at the halfway point, we realize who really, um, who's really my friend, by who is really dealing kindly with me, right? By dealing with the dead, right? By dealing with the dead as far as dealing with the dead man's inheritance. And the way you deal with the dead man's inheritance is the way you would treat Naomi. Um, so Naomi she has no life relationship with Orpah and Ruth. She has no legal relationship with Orpah and Ruth, right? Even, the law's not binding them to their husband. The only relationship she has with Orpah and Ruth is this matter of friendship, which Ruth means. And what else? What other relationship? Nothing really, just the guidance back to Bethlehem and Judah, right? Where she's been there before, so guidance back, right? And the relationship of her speaking the word. That's pretty much the relationship they have. But seeing that Ruth clings to her and Orpah only kisses her shows that Ruth has joined her through pursuing, which is the Hebrew name for clinging, and Ruth has been determined to go with her, not halfway, to go with her unless, if anything but death parts me from you. Uh, um, wow. So Ruth said, "Do not entreat me to leave you and turn away from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you dwell, I will dwell. And your people will be my people. And your God will be my God." So there you go. The will was exposed. So it shows you what was going through her mind. It was going through what? Her heart, and exposed with her intentions and the word, right? Go and return your daughter-in-law. Go and return with your what? Sister-in-law. Okay, you think about it, it was her sister-in-law, but actually, it really wasn't even her sister-in-law. It was her husband's brother's wife. I mean, her sister-in-law would have been her husband's sister. So there wasn't even a relationship there. So what made Orpah not go with Naomi? Number one, there's no husband. Number two, she wasn't absolute with Naomi. What caused Ruth to be absolute ultimately? Your God will be my God. Well, that includes where you go, I will go. Where you dwell, I will dwell. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And Orpah goes back to the other gods. And so the source is there, but ultimately what she's saying is, I want to go to Bethlehem of Judah versus Moab. She's drawn by the food that she's visited her with, right? And she's also just drawn by the fact that perhaps there could be a kinsman redeemer to redeem her inheritance. And Naomi knows that that inheritance won't be legally hers, um, nor through life, nor through marriage, because Elimelech died, the inheritance went to Mahlon and Chilion. Now they died, so now you need a kinsman to raise up Ruth's husband's name upon her inheritance. Yet, because both died, that inheritance is now one. Naomi knows this, so what she needs not Orpah and Ruth, she needs just one of them. And one of them would go with her because they want a kinsman, right? But it's also, how do you treat, not just to get a kinsman, how do you deal with the dead, all right? But also, how do you deal with Naomi? Are you her friend? Do you treat her kindly, right? In what way? You just kiss her, that's an acquaintance, right? Or the fact that Ruth is cleaving, she still tells her to go back with Naomi. But as she's cleaving, she says, I will, right? Then what? And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she ceased speaking to her about it. No more need for exposing. She just needed to know her thoughts and her tensions exposed through what? I mean, her thoughts and her emotions exposed through what? Her intentions. That's what would be manifested in what she was thinking, what she was feeling, as Naomi was saying, go, return, right? Consider in your mind, do I still have sons in my wombs that they may be your husbands? Consider that no. Return my daughters. I'm too old to have a husband, right? So consider that, right? You're too old, right? And you have no sons. What's Orpah thinking? You're right, right? So she doesn't have really any heart to redeem her dead husband's inheritance. So how does she deal with the dead? Well, she doesn't go get a kinsman. She goes back to her gods, right? She goes back to her husband's house, her dead husband's house, right? I mean, maybe she does, but why did Naomi say that? Your husband's house. She wanted to see, who is your husband? Well, Ruth's husband ordained by God is Boaz, right? So find rest in your husband's house. So Ruth is seeking rest, and her husband is Boaz, future in his house, right? So she realizes, actually, my husband's house is my kinsman who could redeem my dead husband's inheritance, right? That's where I will seek my rest. So she cared about raising up her dead husband's inheritance, right, by the Redeemer, thus keeping the name of Elimelech alive, yes, but meaning, um, and Naomi being able to participate in the inheritance. But Naomi, oh, I get it. Naomi was the one who confirmed that Boaz was one of the kinsmen. Naomi was one as well who brought the thought of Boaz, right? Um, okay, so she says, so verse 20, chapter 2, and Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of Jehovah, whose loving kindness has not failed for the living and for the dead. And Naomi said to her, The man is close to us, who is one of our kinsmen. So the loving kindness, God will grant you kindness, you know, according to how you deal with the dead and with me. Deal with the dead, I'm one of kinsmen. You deal with me because you're my friend, right? And um, you go, when I say go, you say, let me glean in the fields. You don't just go glean in any fields, right? You do it at the right time, right, to go. And um, I will confirm about the kinsman. So she needed Naomi to confirm the kinsman, right? Um, because if she would, okay, so Naomi confirms the kinsman, and then Ruth says, You are my kinsman, because Naomi brings him to mind, applies the first robe, washes her, anoints her. Ruth secretly goes down, all because of not only her chastity to Boaz, um, but because of Naomi's conducting her, right? Um, it says, okay, so it says, okay, so all that you have done for your mother-in-law and the death of your husband has been fully told to me, as well as how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth and came to a people whom you did not know before. And you realize, where you die, will die. Where you bury. Oh, I get it. Okay. So Naomi needed to see, number one, two things about their heart. Do they want to raise up? Do they want to redeem their husband's inheritance, which is her son, right? Which is Elimelech's inheritance, right? By marrying a kinsman, having her husband marry one a kinsman. Second, or you're willing to go, right? Second, am I your friend? Do you love me to the point that I can participate in that? Because if you're not, then he'll raise up my son's inheritance, but it's just because, I got you there, but, screw you, right? No, it's not a halfway will, it's a full will. See, her will showed her that not only is she going to the place, right? Not only it's a matter of her husband, right? Which is exposed, like, in the fact that even if you had sons, it's not a matter of your family, right? It's not you. It's a matter of what? Your kinsmen that are there to redeem my husband's inheritance. Okay, and so the kindness you've done for your mother-in-law is that your will is set with her. There's nothing going against your will because it's the will of God, lined up with the will of God, which is the ordination of her, the will for her to marry Boaz. Okay, so she goes to any field. Now look at chapter 2. I know I'm kind of doing a little thing here. Okay, so it says, Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a man of great wealth from Elimelech's family, and his name was Boaz. Okay, and it says she happened to glean in a field, in a portion of the field belonging to Boaz. Wow. So this is a sovereignly arranged situation of her ordination, right? Of the marriage, ordained by God. and initiated by God by visiting his people, right? He visited his people out with food. Report goes out, reaches Naomi, right? And Naomi comes out of the land of Moab on the way to the land of Judah. And Naomi says, "Go, return each of you to your mother's house. May Jehovah deal kindly with you, just as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May Jehovah grant you to find rest." Okay. Each of you in the house of your husband. Then she kissed them and lifted up their voice and wept. Okay, wow. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." And Naomi said, "Return, my daughter. Why should you go with me?" Wow. These people honor with their lips, but their hearts stay far away from me. And that's the Orpah part. "Return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters. Go, for I am too old to have a husband. And if I said I had hope and I had a husband tonight, even 4 sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from having a husband? No, my daughters. It has been far more bitter for me than it should be for you." Why? Because she's too old. She's she's terminated. The old covenant. The old covenant is being terminated because she doesn't have hope for a husband or sons. She is now going to be a widow to death. All right. In a sense, it's a splitting of the law exposing, right? Trying to see who's going to go with her. But in another sense, no, it has to be. Wow. So, so no hope for a kinsman, no hope for inheritance. Yet she has Orpah and Ruth with her, who are friends. They both kiss her, but then the switch up is from clinging to kiss, or from kiss to clinging. I mean, okay. "Turn, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. It has been far more bitter for me than it should be for you, because my husband is dead and my sons are dead, and I'm too old. Too old. You're not as old, so it's far more bitter for me than it should be for you. You're young enough to get married." And even if you were to go with me and get a kinsman, well, I wouldn't have any inheritance. So she's not really motivated to bring them along. Um, if their relationship with her is just a kiss, because that's not close enough for her to have any participation in the inheritance. She still needs to be there. That's why Ruth is friend. It's crazy. Okay, without a kiss. And it says, "And they lifted up their voice and wept again." Okay. Okay, "Go and return and grant you to find rest, each of you in the house of your husband." Yeah, why should you go with me? Hmm. I mean, okay. I just see verse 18, and when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she ceased speaking to her about it. It's when she saw that she was determined. So after exposing her considerations and her love, she clings to her and then is determined. Then Naomi ceases speaking. All right, Lord Jesus. Sorry, I'm just talking in circles. Now, so the two of them traveled until they came to Bethlehem. When they came into Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of Naomi. No, because of them. And the woman said, "Is this Naomi?" Oh, Paul. Interesting. Okay, look at this. Okay, hold on. I just see something here. And when they came to Bethlehem, all the city stirred. Okay, is this Naomi? She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the all-sufficient one has dealt very bitterly with me." Okay, the all-sufficient one has dealt very bitterly with me because the all-sufficient one is our supply to fulfill the demands of the law, right? So the demands of the law could not be met by the all-sufficient one as far as, right, we could not meet the demands of the law. Man could not meet the demands of the law because he didn't have the supply to meet the demands. And the all-sufficient one, God himself, has dealt with Naomi bitterly because so wait, okay, so the all-sufficient one is first mentioned in Genesis 15. So no, it's not. No, it's not. 20. Come on. That's 17. Okay, now the also that is okay. There we go. I see. Okay, now the all-sufficient God. Okay, I'm gonna look at the here. 1 second. Oh, where's my? Okay, it is Genesis 17. Now Genesis 17 is the chapter where Abraham gets circumcised as a response 13 years later from what? The works of flesh producing Ishmael by going to Hagar, representing the principle of the law, the old covenant. So, has dealt very bitterly with me, um, is a matter of the all-sufficient one hasn't, right, has dealt very bitterly with me, is a matter of the works of the flesh, the not being able to fulfill the commandments because of the lack of supply. So the all-sufficient one dealt very bitterly with me. Okay. Interesting. Okay, I went out full, but Jehovah has brought me back empty. Yeah, that has to do with the commandments for sure. Brought me back empty. I went out full, a complete testimony of God, but has brought me back empty in the fact that I could not give life and none could fulfill any of the requirements, so it's bitter. He brought me back empty. I could not have any offspring. Um, brought you back empty because when I married died. Cannot give life. And brought me back empty means she just didn't have any kinsmen. She had no way to redeem her inheritance. The only real way that she could actually get her inheritance redeemed is through Ruth. That's amazing. Is through one of her daughters-in-law, not both, because the inheritance would be split. So if one kid died, then all the inheritance is still of all of Elimelech's can go to one of the brothers that's still alive while she's alive. If she's old, she's a widow, too old, no husband, no sons, too old to marry a kinsman to redeem her inheritance, and she has no life relationship or legal relationship with any of her daughters-in-law. Just a relationship shown by they both kissed her. She kissed them both. So that's her kissing them. And then their response is what? Orpah kisses her. You know, it's a mother-in-law daughter relationship, which are really tough, right? Mother-in-law, daughter-in-law. Yet here is a friendship, Ruth, a clinging, a joining to, right? Awesome. Okay. She said to them, "Do not call me no." Okay, I went up full, but was brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi? Jehovah has afflicted me, testified against me. Jehovah has testified against me. Or Jehovah has afflicted me. Changing of the age, changing of the law to grace, right? Afflicted me, testified against, because in this age the principle is grace, according to his word, according to his speaking, right? He's testified against me, right? The age of the law is over. The principle of the law is over. Not the moral commands, but the principle of the law, which is to fulfill the law through the works of the flesh, right? That principle has been replaced by grace, showing the fact that what? You can't even put them. So it's the age of grace replacing the age of the law is what's going on here. Jehovah has afflicted me. That's what that means. Has testified against me, right? Afflicted means he didn't kill me. He afflicted me, meaning the principle of the law is the moral obligation to the law still remains. It's not completely gone as far as the moral obligation, but the principle of the law has been terminated. So it's a half termination, afflicted, not terminated, right? And the all sufficient one has dealt harshly with me. Has dealt harshly with me. The all sufficient one has dealt very bitterly with me. I see. Why would we deal harsh? The all-sufficient one has dealt. So this is death, perhaps. Dealt harshly with me. Yeah. Harshly, death, yeah. Yeah, okay, I see. I see. Call me Mara. She had a name change because, in a sense, this is a matter of her widowship. He's dealt very bitterly with me. And the fact that my husband died, although I'm old, right? He died before me. So there's bitterness. Not harsh, but bitter for my dead husband, right? My husband died. And the reason my husband died is, as a law, it was a weapon used by sin to kill, right? To deceive and kill. He was killed, right? He died because of sin, and sin was exposed in him through the law, and thus used by sin as a weapon, a knife, to deceive and kill him because of the commandments that he broke. Bitterness, that there's bitterness there in the commandments he broke, and bitterness in the sense that he died before Naomi. So now she has to live her life without him instead of the vice versa, right? So she's a widow. There's a bitterness. Then dealt harshly with me is the fact that her sons died before she died, which is not supposed to be. The parents should die before the sons. So that's harsh. So bitter is the fact that my the law exposes our sin, and with more sin comes death, right? And there's very bitter to the point that it speeded up the process of death, right? The sin using the law as a knife to kill us. So bitter for the husband. And then harsh, and the fact that her sons died. Bitter's the breaking the commandments, sin and death, yeah. So here it is. The law of sin and death. But not the body of sin and death, the law of sin and death. So again, this is the law of the Spirit, like being freeing us from the law of sin and death. Okay, so the law of the sin of death, law of sin is what? The law of sin is bitterness. I mean, sin making the law bitter, right? Same law, but instead of pleasantness, instead of a covenant, right? Instead of God speaking, it became a law of condemnation and death. So the law of condemnation and death. Wow. I forgot what I put last time. Okay. So Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, so she's speaking about her. Okay. Now remember, we're talking about deliverance of the law now. She needs to be delivered from Naomi. By what? Being joined to another. Because until she's joined to another, she's bound by the law, or she's not free from the law. Right? She has set her will and determined to go with her. Okay, so when is she set free? She says, "Go, my daughter." Wow, so she said, "Go, my daughter." So she went and she came and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to glean in a portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was from Elimelech's family. Wow. So our new husband in Christ, right, to be joined to another, And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." The law of spirit life, freeing her. Wow. Okay, so Naomi returned with Matthias, her daughter-in-law, returned in the kingdom of Bethlehem, beginning harvest. That's what it is. Orpah, I forgot, is the law of sin and death. Whoops. Um, and Naomi is the law of the spirit of life. The law of the spirit of life freeing me from the law of sin and death. Of the cleaning and the kissing. Wow. Wow. And they lifted up their voice and wept again. So that is the subjective condemnation. I forgot. Okay. And they lifted up their voice and wept. That's objective. Okay. I'm still going. Mind, love, lifted their voice, wept again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. Uh-huh. But Ruth clung to her. Okay. I see. Okay. Oh, wow. Yeah, I see. So, but Ruth clung to her, to her mother-in-law. But she's not bound by because her husband is dead. All right. Okay. Somebody tell me where the law of the spirit of life is. I know it's Naomi. She saw this during. She's speaking to her about it. I think I put that on the last one. Oh, shoot. All right. Oh, wow. Yeah. Hmm. Return with your sister-in-law. Hmm. Okay, so you got a mother-in-law and a sister-in-law. Asking to return to your sister-in-law, said her mother-in-law. Right, all bound because of the law, right? Okay, so, and there's subjective condemnation. But Ruth clung to her. Okay. Spirit, spirit of life. The law of the spirit of life freed me from the law of sin and death. Wow, this law of sin and death, Orpah, right? If you see that as the law of sin and death, it doesn't matter. Go back to your gods. Because look, you got when she's speaking about returning your daughters, go with and joyous son in the womb. When that commandment comes, return, right? The law, okay, I see it There it is. Okay, and Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go and return each of you to your mother's house. May Jehovah deal kindly with you, just as you dealt with the dead, and with me. May Jehovah grant you to find rest, each of you, in the house of your husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. So there's a first kindness here. It's Jehovah dealing kindly with you. Up to this point, just as you dealt with the dead and me. If that is okay, so that was the objective, right? Condemnation. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." That's the law of good. Okay. We will return with you and your people. The law of good. Okay, no, okay, hold on, I think I got this. Hold on. We'll return with you to your people. And then we said, "Return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands?" The law of the Spirit of life. Wow. See, the law of the Spirit of life and the fact that Jehovah has visited his people with food. So there's a spirit uh, in Christ Jesus from the law and sin death. In Boaz. I don't know, saints. In Boaz from the law of sin and death. There's no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. The law of the Spirit of life has freed me. The law of the Spirit of life has freed me from the law of sin and death. If Ruth is the law of the Spirit of life, and Orpah is the law of sin and death, Naomi is the me. There is no condemnation to those who are what? In Christ Jesus. Because in Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, there's no condemnation, no weeping, for the law of the Spirit of life has freed me in Boaz from the law of sin and death. Orpah, no. Orpah, the law of sin and death, which is sin, Moab, and death, death at husband's house. The law of the Spirit of life, which is Jehovah visits his people with food. Which is in Christ, which is in Boaz. Spirit life has freed me in Boaz, because the law of the Spirit of life is one with Boaz and freed me from the law of sin and death. Oh, come on, what did I put on the last one? Shoot a monkey, dude. It said 1922, okay. Did I put that wrong, man? Come on. The two of them traveled until they came to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. I don't know, man. Naomi was freed from the law of sin and death, as if she was freed from Orpah by Ruth clinging to her. as the law of the Spirit of life because of being in Boaz? I don't know, man. The law of sin is a sin. Law of sin and death. Law of death. I don't know, man. I have to look that up. Golly, all right. All right. Well, I'm going to end it right there, chapter 1. Came to her. He initiated. She's parents had seen him on earth. Because, yeah, there was Ruth there on earth, or the believers there on earth. Need him. So we have the gospel. Okay, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I got off subject there, so we got to get back on verse 19. And when they came to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of free from the law. All the city was stirred because okay, I see what you're saying. Law, spirit, law. What happened? Stirred. Now we see it by law. Yeah, I'm not getting it. Oh, come on. I'll have to look that later. All right. I'm going to have to just end this one and figure out what the heck I was talking about. Spirit of life. I forgot that. Crap, man. All right. Anyways, praise the Lord. We'll start Ruth chapter 2 next video. I got to figure out what's going on here. All right. Sorry. I just wasted all you guys' time. Peace out.